Oh, hey. So check it out, guys. It's been about a week since I filmed this video series. Straight through shot, and it's over 3 hours long. I decided to break it up into 3 parts. I'm just gonna throw this on the front of each of those segments. What you are gonna get on these videos is, if you're a guy who's interested in becoming a helicopter pilot or are a new helicopter pilot and you have some questions and are looking for some insights, then this video might give you some of those. This little series of videos might give you some of those. Feel free to leave the comments in the section below if you have questions or specifics. Hopefully it kind of paints a picture of what you can expect in the world of aviation from one guy's perspective. There's a million different ways that this can be achieved, and I'm not the guy with all the answers, but I thought that maybe this video, this little series of videos, might be somewhat helpful to some guys with some questions. So that freaking noisy ass helicopter. Skidded helicopters are a little bit more tricky to land. They take a fair degree of finesse on the set down. But anyway, the last thing I want to say is about these videos, these opinions do not represent any of my employers, any of my companies I worked for past or presently. So that's a disclaimer that needs to be said. You know, ideally I would be able to post a lot more footage and videos and first-person view footage, but most all the companies you work for, you know, have privacy issues with that, and so they have a policy. So you got to kind of get exceptions and permissions to do things. So that's why it's kind of tricky to make much video content related to first-person view from the cockpit and things like that. But depending on whether or not I get an interest in that, I will try to consider to do so within the boundaries of my policies and whatnot. That's what you're going to get. Check it out. If that's not your cup of tea, then you're going to want to skip ahead and skip to the next video. But thanks for watching, and leave a comment below. We'll see you on the next ones. So once I got to move to the Gulf, I had a better schedule, a normal schedule, this type of schedule that everybody else was on, you know, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That's what all the oil rig workers work. And that's what all the pilots down there work. And shit, to make that kind of money, 6 figures for only working 6 months out of the year, sweet, dude. I had all sorts of free time on my hands, dude. It was awesome. So I made the connections up in Alaska. And what I did was, I had been kind of beating down the doors of Alaska over the phone, figuratively over the phone, emails, and I finally decided at the end of one of my hitches, my 2-week-long is what it's called, a hitch, the days that you're on duty. I decided I was going to book a flight on Miles to Anchorage and go up there and introduce myself to the ERA chief pilot in Alaska and everybody that's up there. And it was awesome. You know, I always wanted to go to Alaska, so the end of my hitch came, jumped on the flight, flew to Seattle, flew up there, and it was super cool because they had, at the time, they had like pilot temporary quarters that transient, you know, that you could just stay in, like apartments that were rented out, which when you live in the Gulf, they also provide you with housing. They provide you with apartments. So that's a major perk while you're down there. You're not spending money on living arrangements. Come on. Damn. And so I show up there, shook everyone's hand, told them how I was super interested, I was really excited. And they're like, oh, wow, man, yeah, that's great. Now you're flying the 139. That's cool. We'll keep you in mind. And it was awesome, dude. I just kind of did a little rip-roaring tour around. I took one of the company cars and drove to the far north side of Anchorage, to the far south side, you know, like an hour and a half, 2 hours each way, and just like explored and blew my mind. It was everything I'd hoped it would be. And all I wanted to do was get on board in Alaska. So I go back to the Gulf and I'm plugging away doing hitch after hitch. And finally, out of the blue, comes an opportunity to work over an entire hitch up there. They were short a pilot for an entire 2-week section. So I was at work 2 weeks. I flew up there, worked for 2 weeks, flew right back down to work for 2 weeks. I was gone from the house for 6 weeks on that one. But major perk was every day, every one of those 14 days I was up there was time and a half pay. It was a shitload of money. It's like a shitload of money. So my wife made do with me being gone for 6 straight weeks, but we got paid for it. And so as the year was kind of winding down, now I'm at the end of my second year with the helicopter company, with ERA, and I had my request in with the chief pilot, the guys up there, they all knew I wanted to transfer, and finally the fucking opening happened and I was able to transfer. So I go up there and I'm flying the 139, dude. And again, I'm flying as a co-pilot, although I'm on the captain pay scale. So I was kind of getting over for a while, but they were teaching me how to fly IFR in the Arctic. So I went up there to fly on the north slope of the Arctic coast of Alaska. And similar to flying in the Gulf, but a little different, more onshore than offshore, a little bit offshore. But it was cool because that's where I started getting into external loads. And the 139 has cameras that look at the load, look at the hook, and look at the aircraft, and pretty badass. And so I got the hang of doing sling loads, not long lines, not vertical reference, but sling loads with cameras. We were using like 50 foot lines and big cargo nets, and we were hauling groceries in these big blue, you go look at my Instagram way back then, you'll see them. Big blue totes, that they would load up with soda and refrigerated foods and all the broccoli and cauliflower and all the food, and we would haul the supplies out to the oil rigs, both offshore and onshore, because up there it's very limited travel. Summer and winter they got ice roads and stuff, but summertime you can't travel across the tundra, there's no roads. And then in time I got qualified in the 212. Actually it was the 412 first, and then the 212 after. And I always wanted to fly that 212, man. That whop, 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 whop. The 2-bladed Huey with 2 engines. Thing's a beast. Love it. All steam gauges, big old fat collective, and gigantic toggle switches for your starter buttons and all this shit. Oh, man, it's great. So all in all, I spent, 4 years or something like that up there, flying the 212, 412, and the 139. So by the end of my time up there, I had been at ERA for about 6 years. And unfortunately, I bared witness to the implosion, you could say, of ERA helicopters in Alaska. It's a whole other political discussion as well, but essentially, ERA became such a large player in the Gulf, making so much money on Gulf contracts for deep water drilling and, the production support, taking people back and forth and equipment and stuff, that they lost interest in Alaska, just like they lost interest in EMS back east. And so when I got hired up there to Alaska, there was over 50 pilots. Some of them had been at the freaking company for 30 years. And ERA, you should know, the history of that company in Alaska is the pioneering helicopter company in Alaska. It was Carl Brady was the first guy to take a helicopter to Alaska, flew it up there, or I think he flew it up there, maybe barged it up there or whatever, but he got it up there and he got on to and this is somewhere around the 50s, dude. It's a funky ass Bell helicopter with wheels. I don't even know the name of it. Looks like a Cessna airplane without wings, but a propeller, and and he got some sort of U.S. Geological surveying mapping contract and started his company, man, ERA Helicopters. At the time it was called Economy. Later on it merged with Rotor Aids to become Economy Rotor Aid ERA Helicopters way back in the day. And so it was really, really a sad thing to see a company that had been the fixture, the pioneering company, long before ERA ever operated in the Gulf or anywhere else, to just fizzle away to nothing. Like I said, there was about 50 pilots up there. I got laid off because I saw almost every other pilot get laid off, and I thought I was safe. I thought I'd have a position back in the Gulf. And I would have had a position back in the Gulf. I went down there and worked in the Gulf on a handful of times, but I would have had a position in the Gulf, except for I had one of those guys I was telling you about, one of those douchebags, as a chief pilot at Era Helicopters. He was only there very temporarily. Every other chief pilot before and after him, I'm great friends with. This guy, he was a problem. And it doesn't pay to be a douchebag in aviation. Case in point. I'm not going to tell you his name. Last I heard, he went back to the line doing EMS somewhere and that up too. So, poor dude. So anyway, he allowed me and a handful of my other similarly well-talented brethren to slip through the cracks, and we lost our jobs, dude. So I ended up going back to Era for one more year after I was laid off for a year. So I got laid off, and it was really a sad deal. I was making a ton of money. I was making more money than I'd ever made before. I was making about 150 G's a year, the most money that I thought I would probably ever make in my career. And I was working a lot, but it was great. Still the same 2 week on, 2 week off schedule. And sadly, I lost my job. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall. We all were suspecting that we were going to be laid off, but being that I was pretty well qualified and plug and play, go wherever I want to go, like, I was pretty damn sure I had a job. But this dude basically let us go. Mismanagement. But that's going to happen, you know. It's going to happen in any field you work in. And fortunately, the good Lord up above, pulling the strings, that's what set me up to get into firefighting, which I had always wanted to do, the utility stuff. Not too many people set out to say, I want to be a Gulf of Mexico IFR oil rig pilot. It's a cushy job, great money, comfortable way of life. It's a damn good job. Great benefits, retirement, lots of time off. It's a phenomenal job. A lot of guys have to enter that job by being a single pilot in an A-Star or a Koala or whatever down there initially, early on, and you're not making a ton of money, but that's kind of the, cutting your teeth. But once you get into the crewed aircraft environment, you get up into the S-92, 139s, 189s, you're making fat bank. It's relatively safe. It's a damn good job for sure. So I had kind of become accustomed to just being like, oh, it's such a great job. They take such good care of me, my quality of life afterwards. I wasn't really intending to leave it anytime soon, even though I really wanted to be doing utility and doing heli skiing and all that other stuff. So I got laid off, and for the first time ever, I collected unemployment. And when you're doing unemployment, you got to show that you're applying for jobs constantly, a couple times a week or whatever. So that was a total pain in the ass. And what I can tell you about unemployment is, this is the one only time I ever did it, the state will find any reason they can to not pay you. If you travel to try to find a job and you're out of the state for a number of days that month looking for a job, like I described earlier, that disqualifies you because you're on vacation or whatever. So they're like every month, I think I was unemployed for around 4 months, and I got like $3,500 total. It was ridiculous, dude. Do not plan on freaking unemployment pulling you through at all. It was miserable. So after being unemployed for about 3 months, a friend of mine who had been one of my co-pilots in Alaska in Era, he had left about a year prior and joined this phenomenal company out in California, a little known company known as PJ Helicopters. And I can tell you what, man, PJ Helicopters is an absolutely diamond in the rough, outstanding, phenomenal company. It's run by a family, and they've been in it. The uncles and the brothers, and now the younger sons that are now running it, have been in it for 30 years or more, and they have grown to become a freaking powerhouse in Northern California of utility, power line, electric work, as well as firefighting. And they've expanded their fleet, expanded their facilities, and I only got to work there for one season. And it was a total pleasure of my career, and all the guys that are still there, they're friends, and I'm stoked on those guys. They're absolutely awesome. So I got hired because my friend put in a good word for me. So funny thing, small world is, I got hired as a co-pilot. Unfortunately, I was way overqualified for a co-pilot, but they were in need, and I was in need of a job. So over the phone, he hired me, and he's like, "Okay, great." Just 10-minute conversation. He's like, "He put in a good word for you. That's good enough for me. When can you start? Can you be out here April 2nd or whatever it was?" And I was like, "Yep, I'll be there." So I was stoked, man. And so me and the family, the 3 kids, we took the center row seat out of the Land Cruiser, the 100 Series Land Cruiser, and took this massive road trip, 12-day road trip from home out to check out PJ Helicopters, because I had already been offered the job and I wasn't going to start for a month and a half or something, or a month. So I went and looked at the facility and took this giant tour down the West Coast and back into Sequoia National Park and all this stuff, and it was fantastic. And then April came around and I started out as a co-pilot. So there's another one of these instances where, like, I went from making a shit ton of money to getting paid as a co-pilot, like absolutely bare minimum. I can't even tell you what it was. Bare minimum. And so it took a little while for the fire season to start, and I was hired as a BlackHawk co-pilot because they had like 2 or 3 BlackHawks operational at the time, doing power line utility work, changing out these power line poles, the wood ones, around 25 to 3,000 pounds. Not the big honking bitches of 25,000 pounds with the crane lifts. And went out and basically just, did co-pilot duty, man. Helped manage the collective, kept an eye on all the systems, and just was the go-to, just was the guy that was there, doing everything that was needed. And went and did a handful of jobs in the BlackHawk as a co-pilot. And then they also had the 214B1, which is that's maybe one of my top 3 helicopters I've ever flown. And I barely got to fly it a handful of times, but it's so badass. It's basically a Huey, a single engine Huey with rotor blades. The cord, the width of the rotor blade is probably 30 inches, 2.5 feet. No, it's got to be bigger than that. Well, it's not 3 feet long, but it's like these swinging barn doors, dude. 214B1. They have a 214B2. Not as cool. Not anywhere near as cool. 214B1 has these massive rotor blades and basically a Chinook helicopter turbine engine driving the whole system. One turbine engine, and these things are raped apes, dude. Unbelievable. So badass. And basically they were developed by Bell Helicopters for the Iranian military back in the 90s or something like that. So there was this massive fleet of them. I don't know, 30, 40, 50 of these ships. And when Iran got done with them, dudes down in Australia, McDermott, generally bought up everything and has all the parts and the supplies in the warehouse, and they put those machines to work on firefighting all around Australia, all summer long in their summer. And then when it turns winter down there, they contract with PJs and they ship a couple up here. They ship them up in containers or on flatbeds oversea. And then PJ spends about a week putting them together and puts them bastards to use, puts them to work, puts them on poles and construction, and right back out doing firefighting. And it's a unicorn helicopter that is a total brute. Kills me that I never get to fly it again. So after about 2 or 3 months of doing that, being co-pilot, turns out PJ had a couple other contracts that opened up for their smaller craft, and One of them was for their Jet Ranger and Long Ranger, and it was a contract for the power line company, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, their main bread and butter out there in California, doing a survey job. And I went and worked with, we had two helicopters and like 2 crews. So I was one of the pilots, and my buddy Kyler was one of the other pilots. And so they were like, dude, you totally have all the qualifications. We're going to take you out of the co-pilot seat. We'll put some of these other guys that don't have any experience you have in there. They hired another guy or two. And then I went to work with my own Jet Ranger. And so in all of my career, this was my first time being a single pilot, single engine aircraft, running my own show, not having a crew, not having to just work in a crew environment. And it was awesome, dude. And our job was to go out, and there was some 70,000 towers, power line poles and towers that needed to be photographed. And so between the 2 ships, we basically started up in Redding, Northern California, worked all down along the Sierra to Bakersfield, crossed over the valley, and we worked all down in through the valley, crossed over the valley over to San Luis Obispo and Pismo Beach, and then worked our way all the way back up north. So lots of flying around in like San Francisco's airspace, all up in the mountains above San Francisco, all around, all the way back up to Arcata at the north end of California. And I was on that contract for about 2 or 3 months, and got a lot of good kind of, mountain flying experience, single pilot flying experience doing that. And doors were off every day, and we had like a ground crew that was helping take our doors and stuff to and from, and we'd spend a couple days at a hotel. We'd usually pick the best hotel. We'd spend maybe a week in one hotel, and we would just bite off that whole region, photographing all these towers. It was so badass because we had the doors off, and I had a photographer who had this huge, super long and badass Nikon camera and this huge long lens. And one of them lives over here in Bend. I just hit him up, and he's not home. He's over in Colorado working, but he's a super rad dude. Super sick whitewater kayaker, like 50-foot drops and stuff. Gnarly. So that was one of the best jobs I ever had, flying. And some of the best experience, and working for one of the best companies, man. PJ's absolutely fantastic. I'm out here touring through this countryside and cruising past all these little farming communities. Pretty neat. And so, being that I was only hired seasonally, at the end of the season, things were winding down, and it was October, I think. End of September, October timeframe. So I've been out there about 6 months. And again, it was one where I stayed out there and worked. I worked 12 days on, 2 days off when I was on fires, and I never went home. I went home maybe twice out of that whole freaking 6 months, dude. I went home twice for maybe a week each time. Another example of the sacrifices and what it takes to chase this freaking dream, which hopefully ultimately lands you at the job that you really want, or you can be home. Sadly, in most people's cases, it's such a struggle along the way that comes later on, when your kids are already grown and you've missed out on a ton. Sacrifices, dude. So the season ended, and went in and had a nice meeting with the owners and the chiefs and everybody, and they're like, dude, you really killed it. You knocked it out of the park. We've never hired somebody as a co-pilot and then switched them over to be a 135 pilot, a Part 135 commercial pilot. You did a great job for us. We'd love to have you back. And I was like, that sounds great. I don't have anything else going on. Sounds awesome. When you want? Well, actually, what I had going on was my first year as driving a snowcat groomer up at Powder Mountain, our ski resort up above Ogden, in Ogden Valley. So I already had that lined up. So I was already kind of 1 foot out the door because that's what, it wasn't a permanent deal at PJ's. So they're like, yeah, man, just go ahead and go do that for the winter. We'll have you back in the springtime and we'll have you on full time. And I was like, that's awesome. But I told him, I'm like, the whole time I was flying that the Jet Ranger, I was still getting paid the same pay I was getting paid as a co-pilot. Peanuts, dude. They didn't really bump my pay up but I was getting paid one of the highest co-pilot pays out there anyway. But so that was the biggest thing. Is like, I'd love to come back, but obviously we really need to renegotiate the pay because there's no way I can move my family out here, become a full-time PJ guy on these rates. It's impossible. So they're like, yeah, sure, cool, no problem, we'll do that. So winter rolls around, have my whole winter off. Springtime rolls around, and I start making the phone calls. Hey, man, what's up? Let's, when are we going to start training? And it was a span of about a month and a half, several phone calls, and finally I got to the last phone call, and it was like, yeah, man, we're ready to have you out here in a couple weeks. But by the way, we're going to start you out doing this. And I was like, okay, well, that's not really what I had in mind. I'm a heavy helicopter pilot, BlackHawk pilot. I don't want to start at the bottom there. And they're like, oh, well, and it wasn't really necessarily the very bottom, but still, pay-wise, it wasn't great. And I was like, well, what about the pay? And they're like, oh, let me talk to the owners, we'll get back to you. And then the next phone call, they called back, and it was like, yeah, this is what we're going to start you out at. And I was like, oh my God, it's going to be I'm going to have to go out there alone again. I can't afford to move my family out there. But again, at that time, it was the only iron I had in the fire. And it was what I was banking on for the whole damn winter. So it was kind of a shock, but I didn't have many choices. And then lo and behold, my friend Adam, who I helped him get his job here at the Sky Crane Company. He scratched my back to get back up at Era, and I scratched his back to get down here, and he's one of my best friends. Love the dude. He's from Wales. He's a Brit, and he is moved here. He's got a young son and married this outstanding young lady, and he's being a stepdad to her kids, and he built a house above Sacramento, and he started a farm, dude. So he is on my plans to go through on my way home. Got the onboard refrigerator in the car here, planning to pick up some meat from his freaking awesome little farm. But super small world. The longer you spend in this industry, pretty soon your age group, your friends, the guys that you grew up with and started out with, are now the dudes that are in charge. And so it is such a small world that, again, you can't afford to not have a good reputation. And it doesn't take long once you're finally established to have a lot of contacts and a lot of guys that are in the positions to get you a job, or help you get a job, or get your buddy a job, or whatever. And so it's so funny. So lo and behold, Adam calls me up. He's like, dude, do you want to come back and fly for Era, and this time get carded as a fire pilot in the 212? And I was like, shit, yes. I was like, yeah, absolutely. And so he's like, okay, let me make a phone call. So he calls up the chief pilot of Era, and then he calls me back. He's like, all right, dude's going to call you pretty soon. And I happen to know this guy. He was an acquaintance. I worked with him a few times in Alaska, and he's now the chief pilot, and he's still the chief pilot. He's a total badass. He's awesome. Stellar dude. So we talk on the phone, and I had spoken to him midway through that fire season working at PJ's, because you've got to do that, man. You've got to stay in touch with people. And I was standing up on some hillside in my little pickup truck on this super awesome couple days I had on my hands, and I was camping on the Feather River, fishing and all this stuff. So I just pulled off, and I called him, and we chatted for damn near an hour and just got caught up. And he had recently newly taken the position, and So it's so important to maintain these connections. Because you never know, dude's going to end up being... And then, ironically, back a year and a half ago when I was working at HTS, he called me and he's like, dude, how's it going? I might be calling you for a job. I might be interested to go and fly that massive sky crane. I might be done with this job before you know it. So, small world, it just goes round and round. But I went down, Era had me come back down and interview again, which was fine, but I was able to negotiate my terms this time for the most part. And so this time I told them, look, when I got laid off last time, I had no A-star time. If I had 50 hours of A-star time, I would have been cardable to fly for the Forest Service on fire contracts. So I'll come back and work for you to do this fire carding in the 212, the Huey. But you need to put me in the same class with all these other new hires to get trained in the A-star as well. And sure enough, he's like, yeah, sure, no problem, whatever. Unfortunately, they did not bring me back at the same pay grade as the IFR captains. So I didn't go back to that super cushy, making tons of money. But I was still pretty damn high on the VFR pay scale doing utility, so it was still reasonable. So I agreed. I got the A-star transition, came back to work for them, and so I told Peaches, I was like, man, thanks for the offer and everything, but with what you guys are offering me, there's just no way. I can't do it. They're willing to have me back at my old job. There's a new chief pilot. He's my friend. The old dude's gone, and I got my job back. So they're like, dude, I totally understand. Hey, keep us in mind. Maybe I'll come up there and work with you guys for them. And so I parted ways with PJ. But now, in those 4 or 5 years that I was working up there in Alaska, once I got in the 212, we didn't have cameras, but we had mirrors. Great big dish convex mirrors, and that's what I did a lot of external loads. A lot of external loads and some long lining. Vertical reference, you could say. And I did that for years, so I was pretty comfortable, pretty familiar, and had a lot of flight time flying external loads. And flying external loads with a mirror is a pain in the ass in some ways. It can be pretty easy too, but when shit starts going wrong, there's techniques that you got to do to get the load back under control and stuff, and it's definitely its own set of challenges for sure, and it takes a high degree of skill as well. So I had, not quite close to a couple hundred hours of long line time or external load time up there. So then I get trained in the A-star, which is badass. It was just the B2. They didn't have any B3s, and I ended up ferrying two helicopters from Montana all the way through Canada up to Alaska. And then once up there, about a week later, we ferried them down from Anchorage to Juneau for the tour season to start. And that flight will always be the crown jewel of my flying career, no matter where I fly elsewise, probably. Otherwise, it was 3 legs. We took off from Anchorage, went down through the Prince William Sound, landed at Valdez for fuel, took off from there, landed on the second leg, landed at Yakutat. It's a little fishing town that you can only get there by airplane or boat. And then we made our way all the way into Juneau. And those 3 legs, man, maybe like 4 or 5 hours worth of flight time. It was a bluebird day. Winds were in our favor. And flying along the Alaska coast up there for about 4 or 5 hours over the span of probably 500 miles or more was mind-bending, unbelievable beauty. Ocean, mountains, abrupt mountains, and then just towering 15, 20,000 foot mountains like Mount Fairweather. Towering mountains within just miles of the coast. And massive glaciers coming out. The Malaspina Glacier is like the world's largest Piedmont glacier, which is the type of glacier that does not dump into the sea. It's separated from the ocean by a small sandbar, a small barrier island. It's massive. It goes on for, like you're flying over this glacier for half an hour. It goes on for like 100 miles, 60 miles, something like that. I don't know. And so once I got down there to Juneau, I spent part of that season flying tours and setting up dog camp and doing long line work out of the A-Star. And that was where I really kind of got into the vertical reference, using the little cutout in the window there, or taking the doors off. Unfortunately, all my time there was on the right seat. They only had a couple machines, A-Stars in the company, that were set up for left-hand drive, which is better for doing long line because you're leaning over your collective arm instead of reaching with your collective arm and looking out the other side. So got some pretty good experience there. And then as the summer season wore on, it was time to go and get carded for the 212 to do the firefighting contract in Alaska. And this was at a time when the managers that had been in place up there were essentially terminated, let go. Almost everyone had been laid off up there. There was still a bunch of facilities up there, hangar space and equipment and helicopters, brand new helicopters that were parked, like two-year-old helicopters that were parked, collecting dust in the hangars, and almost nobody around. It was a ghost town. There was a handful of dudes. And so I got hired back to be one of the last handful of dudes to do this fire contract. Well, unfortunately, because of bad management, there was no management up there. We ended up, me and the two other guys that were going to get carded. There was three of us that were going to get carded, and then there were like two other guys that were already carded. The three of us, we missed our window to get carded by the Forest Service because the aircraft never came up to become available to get the check ride done. It was being held up for an emergency locator transmitter that was out for repair, and that's a mandatory required item to fly, especially in Alaska. But you got to have a crash-activated emergency locator transmitter beacon installed on the aircraft. Well, if there had been a manager up there that had been like, I've got all these check rides lined up, the Forest Service is here, the check ride, we've got to have that part back by such and such date, let's get it done. That wasn't happening. And so we sat there day in, day out, and eventually the contractor, or the Forest Service, the OAS, started looking into it, and he's like, you guys don't even need to have this many pilots for the two aircraft you've got. You can manage it with the two pilots you got. So you guys have wasted enough of my time as it is. For 2 weeks or more, it was like, okay, meet us tomorrow, or meet us on Wednesday. We'll have it all buttoned up. Wednesday rolls around. Oh, sorry, man. Aircraft's still not available. And there was like 2 mechanics working in the hangar out of what used to be dozens of mechanics. And it wasn't their fault. It was just because nobody in management was getting the equipment ready, getting it back from a repair shop, or pulling one out of the other aircraft or whatever. So I still was employed. And so what happened was I went back to the North Slope, back to oil and gas, flying the same helicopters I used to fly, the same 212s, not doing firefighting, which I had been hired back for. Kind of broke my heart, but I figured, maybe next season. We'll see how next season pans out. So I went back up to the North Slope, and this time it was on the one last remaining contract that they had out of 15 or more contracts that had been in place for decades up there. It was the last one, and they had terminated the IFR requirement. So I never got put back up on the IFR captain pay scale, which would have been 150 G's a year. So instead I stayed on the VFR pay scale, the utility pay scale, which was substantially less. And so I divided my time and did my whole year there at Era, combined between the tours and back on the North Slope, back in the Arctic. Winter came and went, and it's brutal conditions. And I was getting paid a lot less, but it was my job. And I almost took a job because that contract was about to expire as well. And the company that we were contracted to bought their own helicopters, their own 212s, and they bought some of them from Era. And they had put some of these aircraft to work down in the Cook Inlet, which is just outside of Anchorage, which is a way better place to work. Shit, if you can work on the Kenai Peninsula, which is like world-class fishing, tourist stuff, or work out of Anchorage and service the oil rigs from there, is dream job. Instead, I was on the North Slope for 2 weeks at a time. So those guys were all psyched to have me join the oil company. I almost became an oil company employee and left Era and kept my job. And they were offering all kinds of great money. It was going to be like 140 G's a year, and they had all these stock options and all these things, and that's what was my plan. And I had made a good rapport with the chief pilot there, who was an airplane guy and would fly jets from Anchorage down to Houston, where the company was based. And I had good inroads with those guys, and they loved the job I was doing. I was making it happen. And, you know, as a helicopter pilot, as you do, you get creative and you think outside the box, and you completely within the parameters of the regulations. And that's what you're paid to be an expert in, is know how to work within the bounds of the regulations to make the shit work, make the shit happen. And you get a lot of pilots that sit around and twiddle their thumbs at any chance they get. And if they're bad enough at doing that, then they get run off a job. So there's a balance, you know. You've got to be good at your job, and you got to freaking not be hasty and be taking chances and breaking regulations, because that shit catches up with you. And it will bite you in the ass, and it will ruin you. So you absolutely have to abide by the regulations. And let's be honest, the regulations are written in blood, practically. A long time ago, there weren't regulations. And these regulations were instated because people crashed, people died. And so they are there to save your ass. And it's awesome that they are there to be a guideline and a parameter and boundaries for you to operate within. There's no reason to ever freaking operate outside the boundaries. Shit is scary. Do you want to have your pants scared off? Push your limits and go outside the regulations. The regulations are very liberal. The envelopes, there's no need to freaking break regulations. So anyway, they were happy, and they loved the job I was doing for them. Everything was going great. Then one of those other two guys, one of the three of us, he had been a co-pilot at HTS, at the Sky Crane Company, several years prior. So he bumped into, ironically, a Sky Crane in Santa Ynez, California, just north of Santa Barbara, over the mountains. And, I don't know, like a few weeks prior, and he bumped into the crew, and they were chit-chatting, and he's like, well, so he found out from them that they might have an opening and might be in need of pilots, because they were having some people retire or whatever. So he hits me up and just tells me, oh, have you ever thought about flying the Sky Crane? I was like, not really. I mean, they're badass, but never really been on my radar. However, utility and firefighting and longlining and sling loading sure the hell is, so tell me more. So a couple emails, a couple phone calls, and in touch with the chief pilot. I get off my 2-week hitch up there, and it's all arranged. They've got the date set for me to come and interview, and I land 2 days later, whatever, jump on an airplane. They pay for my flight to come over, put me up in a hotel, give me a rental car, the whole shebang, take me down and give me the grand tour of the Aurora facility, which is where we're going right now. And it is top tier, phenomenal, mind-blowing. It's like a museum. It is massive. They can fit almost the entire fleet of Sky Cranes inside. They can easily fit 8 Sky Cranes in there, if not 10 or 12 if they want to squeeze them. If they took all the blades off, of course, but even with the rotor blades on. And these are 72-foot diameter rotor blades on a Sky Crane. Massive, dude. So, interview with the chief pilot, and he's an old dude, and we hit it off great. It was a pretty quick conversation. Tell me a little bit about yourself, and I just gave him as short of a recap of my career as I could, and everything else was spelled out on my resume. And seriously, less than 10 minutes, and he's like, okay, cool, you want to take a walk around and see the facility? I was like, shit, yeah. I didn't say shit. So we go down, and there's sky cranes inside, and I could not believe. The last time I guess I had seen a sky crane, a couple of them on that fire season, but I'd never been up next to one. The last sky crane I had been up next to was in the Army Aviation Museum in Fort Rucker, Alabama, several years before, and it was a bare bones model, green, you know. So I had a frame of reference of how large they were, but it had been a long time. So I go in there, and they are immaculately maintained, fresh paint, flying museum pieces is what they are. Imagine like the most classic. These machines are 1960s models, most of them. Former military, been rebuilt. Imagine a classic 1960s Cadillac that every bolt and nut has been restored, rebuilt, rewired, every light bulb, every indicator. They're flying museum pieces, man. They're unbelievable. Let alone the capabilities of firefighting, belly tankers, and external load. And they even have a winch on the external load ones. You can lower your load down into place if needs be, and retract it if you're operating somewhere you can't hover and do that. And so I was blown away. We went and looked at the engine shop, the gearbox shop, everywhere around the avionics shop, everywhere around the whole facility. The paint booth. The paint booth is enormous. And I was blown away. He said, give me a few days to think about it, and I'll let you know. I've got to take a trip down to San Diego or something, he said, but I've got a couple other guys to look at, but you'll hear from me in a few days. And I felt really good about it. Shook his hand. Left, went and told the wife, you know, right away that I'm like, I think this is a go. I can't believe it. And I asked him in the interview, I'm like, so why would you be willing to hire me to fly as a captain, not a co-pilot, as a captain on your sky cranes? Because that was the most important thing. And I verified that before I left Alaska on that last phone call. I said, just to make sure, after all these emails we've had, this is an interview for a captain job, right? Oh yeah, no, definitely. I was like, okay. So I get down there, and he's like, and I ask him, and he's like, well, truth be told, man, there's a huge, in this day and age, there's a huge gap in experience between the 20,000 and 30,000 hour logging pilots and firefighting pilots that are all retiring, and guys that have like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 hours like you. And there's no one in between. There's nobody that has 10 and 12 and 15. There's a handful. There's a couple, but you know, the bulk of pilots that you have to pull from now are guys with much less experience, you know, 4,000, 5,000 hours, which is a lot of experience still too. I mean, it takes years and years and years to get that many hours, doesn't it? Well, we're getting up into some pretty interesting terrain here now. Definitely an overcast cloud layer, and so it might snow up here. Gaining elevation, there's probably going to be some wildlife out here. And the mountains are forming, so it's pretty cool. Glad I came this way. Let's turn on that radar detector. So sure enough, man, about a week or so later, yeah, it was on my 2 weeks off. It was a few days before I went back to Alaska. He called and offered me the job, and then sent me the email, and I couldn't believe it. I got up to Alaska, and ironically, my supervisor, my boss, who practically was mainly operating out of the Gulf, but had kind of helped us get shit going up in Alaska. He was very half, 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out kind of situation. Well, he was being terminated. They eliminated his position. And he's like a senior management guy. So he called, we talked, and he was bummed out to tell me, man, I wish I was going to be there to work for you and get you what you need and what you want and go to bat for you. And I was like, dude, don't even worry about it, because I'm putting in my freaking 2 week notice right now. And as much as I loved working at Aero, and as much as there's great dudes there, and as well as they took care of me early on, a lot of things had changed. And it was the one time in my whole flying career that I put in a 2-week notice. Well, besides to go to Lifeflight. And so it was on my terms. And because they had totally hosed me, and my pay was so short compared to doing the same exact job that I had been doing, it was very satisfying to make that phone call and send in that resignation letter after they freaking laid me off the last time. So we'd come full circle, man, and couldn't believe it. And sure as shit, man, wrapped it up there. Did my last 2-week hitch up there. The guys at the oil company were like, "What? You're not staying? Oh no." And yeah, man, went down and started training in the Sky Crane. And fortunately, the utility side of the industry is now getting much more into the 2-week on, 2-week off, providing a schedule so that people can have a way of life. And so sure enough, man, I maintained my same work schedule, but now I was flying Sky Cranes. And so initially they just wanted to put me to work, getting a heli belly tanker. It's called a heli tanker. And the tanks are up about 2,400 gallons of water. Now, you're almost never going to be in an environment that you can fill it all the way up, because you'll either have almost no fuel on board or you'll be at sea level, because, the higher you go in altitude, the less the aircraft can perform. But man, we're really getting some cool terrain here, dude. Way cool. And it's just this super high desert barren. There's longleaf pines in here and just rocks protruding out of everywhere. I gotta record some of this for you guys. And lots of old fire damage and stuff. And yeah, it's definitely resembling western central Idaho, like the McCall Mountains and up north of Boise, up in those sawtooths. It's very deserty and stuff like this. It's so cool, but super windy, narrow ass road. Put this camera away. So they initially hired me to be a fire captain, and I'd never been carded, so I had to get carded. So I had to get trained, and I went and trained with the most thorough check airman and designated practical examiner, DPE, that I've ever flown with. The best training I've ever received and the best check ride I've ever received. And I'm going to go meet him later this week. He's a fantastic dude. He's been doing it a long time. And kind of wish I had more time on my hands, dude. Camp Creek is right through here. I bet there's some fish down here. And I do have my fishing gear on board. Because at the end of this trip, not totally sure which route I'm going to take to get home. Depends on what day I get finished. But I do suspect some skateboarding at some pretty stellar skate parks are in order, as well as hopefully some fishing too. Some fly fishing, that is. So, got the check ride knocked out. Then they typed me in the S61 as a bonus, because they needed to send some guys to Puerto Rico. So, boom, me and a couple guys did like the ground school for S61. And the S61 helicopter, if you've never seen it or don't know what I'm talking about, it's got like a boat hull, and it's what the President of the United States flies around on Marine One until the S92 gets fully fledged. That's what the S61 is. So it's this big old flying boat, basically. It's much smaller than a Sky Crane, but still can lift a heavy ass load. It can lift 5,000-6,000 pound towers and light poles and water buckets and stuff like that. So they typed me in the 61, so I was like, bonus, dude. 2 type certificates added to my certificate, which at this point now I have the S70, which is the BlackHawk, the Augusta 139/180, the Augusta AW139/AB139, same aircraft, 2 different manufacturers. There's one Augusta Bell was in partnership for the development. So I've got those 3 type ratings, and now the S70, not S70, the S6, SK64 Sky Crane, and the S61. Got some freaking type ratings on my certificate now, dude. Trying to show some gray hairs now. And went down to Puerto Rico. That was phenomenal. Spent a month and a half down there. This was after that big ass hurricane they had back in 2018 into 2017 or whenever it was. And went down there and did a bunch of utility work. And me and Levi practically freaking lived like kings on the beach, dude. There's gigantic iguanas and stuff that live up in the trees. And man, we would get done with our flights for the day and go and hang out on the beach and just wait for a call, which a lot of times we had a lot of time on our hands. So total paradise. I'd never been to the Caribbean before. It was awesome. I get done with that. I come home, and guess what happens? I freaking broke my ankle. Doing what? Skateboarding. You got to pay to play, man. And it's the first significant injury I've ever had of skateboarding. So I was out for about 3 months, 3.5, close to 4 months before I could go back to work. And that was during the beginning of the fire season, unfortunately. So the company did me a solid, dude. They didn't make me take disability. They kept paying me. Because the reason they do that is because a lot of these senior jobs, especially utility, firefighting and stuff, especially the sky cranes and stuff, is they'll have pilots on an annual salary, on a retainer. And they only work during the fire season. They work for a reduced rate, but they keep their rate year round. So they'll work for 5 months, depending on the season, might extend a lot longer than that, but they might work for 5 months and be off for 7 months, dude. Collecting a paycheck every 2 weeks constantly. It's a pretty sweet gig, right? Firefighting, dude, is where it's at. And so they really didn't have a big problem with keeping me on pay because it wasn't too much different than, their other guys that were off season. So I healed up, came back to work, and then that's when I got my forest fire card for the snorkel and the belly tank. So I've never been long line carded with the Forest Service with a Bambi bucket. So I'm going to need to do that this year because a couple of our contracts have Bambi buckets, bucket ships for the S61, which they've always been, but also for the Sky Crane. Some of the alpha model Sky Cranes are going to be bucket ships. So that's going to be super fun. It's going to be hella fun, dude. Anything you do vertical reference is awesome. So, did my first season of firefighting, the real deal, and put out a bunch of fires. One worked some big complex fires in California, Colorado, and that was the whole first year in the Sky Crane world. The second year, I went and did construction, and heavy lift construction, and you can see some of my footage and stuff back on my channels and stuff and I'll be trying to post more of it if I can get another helicopter channel up and going on YouTube, and if I can get approval, or at least post things that aren't outside of what's permissible. It's some pretty gnarly shit, but going and building power line, transmission lines, and doing that stuff I talked about earlier. Dude, we are rolling deep here, going on 3 hours. I'll bet it's nothing but crickets. Almost no one is watching this shit. How many freaking multi-hour long videos have you watched? Have I watched? A couple. But this is just one guy's story. A lifelong story. We have covered everything. Almost. We're almost to the end. And got about 12 more minutes to hit the 3 hour mark. Let's see if I can wrap this up. So that was fun. Had to go take my check ride, do it with the snorkel, which is pretty fun, pretty interesting. But and then I went back to work doing construction, and had to go out to Minnesota. Went down to Texas, did some big jobs, and had to wrap my mind around lifting these massive towers and installing them. And at first, it was terrifying, dude. The max gross weight with the tower and the weight of the aircraft and your fuel and your personnel on board is 47,000 pounds. That's, I don't know how heavy a big rig semi-truck is with a full load in the back, but imagine somewhere around there that you're trying to hover and precisely place loads on a pin. There's literally a pin you have to set these things onto. A pin that's only about 2 inches in diameter of this massive 100-foot tall structure. And it was a total mind trip. It was a super big challenge, but I wanted to do it because just like with the hoist on the Lifeflight ship, it's like I want to do it all, you know? I mean, you wouldn't hand somebody a Swiss Army knife and be like, here you go, here's a Swiss Army knife, but you can only use the fork and the spoon. You can't use the knife. You'd be like, no way, dude. I'm gonna use the fork, the spoon, the knife, everything, the corkscrew, all that, right? So here's a junction. Let's check our route here. Left turn, that's the one I want. Oh yeah, we got a couple big junctions up here. We are approaching the John Day area. We're going to drive through John Day, I think. I researched him last night to see if he was like a mythical figure. 48 miles to John Day. And he's a legend that really existed, but there's not a lot of history about him. So there's a lot of stories about him. So anyway. Oh shit. How much gas do I got? 80 miles. Okay, whew. We're good. 80 miles worth of gas. So it was a super hard challenge, but I was working with the best, and there was only 3 of us in the company that could do it. So I wanted to be one of those guys that could do it. So I went to the trouble and persevered through the training and the hassle and the headache and the nightmare and the terror of getting to the point where I could do that shit. And at first it was like just trying to set one, just part of one. You know, my training guy, Dave, would take me out there and then he would hand off and then he would do it and then I would do a little bit and then he would do a little bit. So the first ones were just mind-blowing. Like, this can't be done. This is insane. It's super dangerous. It's way too much to wield. It's too much power for one man to wield. And let's be freaking honest, it is. It's insane. And so, with taking on the construction side of the house, my pay went up pretty substantially, and I was happy, dude. I was doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off in Minnesota. Had built this whole big transmission line out there, this whole network, this whole system. That job was winding down. We were done with it. I finished that contract off and flew that aircraft from Baudette, Minnesota, over to Fargo, North Dakota, and put it in the hangar. And that was the last time I flew a Sky Crane. Now, let's talk about wrapping this shit up here. Talking about Lifeflight. Sometime after I was trained up in the construction side, there was a job opening at Lifeflight. Now, I'm going to have to rewind real quick for the whole picture of Lifeflight. Now, flying for Lifeflight has been my dream job since day one. When I was a young kid, when I was 12 years old, my youngest brother was born, and when he was about 2 or 3 years old, he got a major infection from a huge cut he had that the doctors didn't, he got infected. So he had to be life-flighted from Brigham City, Utah, to Primary Children's Hospital, which is where I freaking fly all the time now, on Lifeflight. And so, yes, I wanted to be a heli ski pilot, absolutely, first and foremost, but you don't see heli-ski freaking helicopters around my neighborhood all the time and around my town. But you do see Lifeflight all the freaking time. They fly right over my house. I fly right over my house now. But you see them out there landing on the freeway, and you know, it's always been this attainable dream and goal if I just persisted. And so when I first got out of the Army back in 2010, that was one of the first places I visited because I was able to drive there and talk to the director of operations and the chief pilot at the time. That DO has since left, and the chief pilot is now the DO, and it's so cool to, you know, we've all aged 10, 11 years, but he was awesome guy to converse with, and I stayed in touch with him, and he gave me good encouragement. He looked at my resume, like I said, about 1,800 flight hours, and he's like, man, you got really good experience, but just not, you know, you don't meet our insurance requirements, and you need to get some more experience flying in the mountains and doing single pilot stuff. So why don't you go down and try to get a job in the Gulf of Mexico, not the Gulf of Mexico, in the Grand Canyon or Alaska, you know, try to get some more single pilot experience and just stay in touch with us. I did that. And about 4 years later, I did my first interview with Lifeflight. And it was a phone interview when I was in Alaska on the North Slope. And I got to meet the guys. It lasted about an hour. We didn't even do Skype. It was just a speakerphone, you know, it was on speakerphone. And it was like my first intro, a lot of questions and stuff, and it was cool. And, you know, before I even got off hitch, I think up there, they called and said, "Yeah, man, unfortunately, you were I remember him saying, you were at a disadvantage because you weren't here in person." But that's just the type of operation and organization this place is that even though it's like you're barking up a tree that's maybe, you know, pretty outrageous, they don't want to discourage you. Look, we're up in the snow zone, dude. Good thing we got our traction tires on still. We're at 4,000 feet. That's not that high, but beautiful ponderosa pines up here. Gorgeous. But that's the type of organization it is that, like, they're just such genuine, good, excellent people that they didn't want to be like, dude, you called in on an interview. Get out of here. But, you know, even though I'm still a local, I live there. And so it didn't work out. They encouraged me to come back. This story could go on for a while. I interviewed another time about 2 years later. This time it was in person. This time I was one of 5 finalists. And I went out and flew the helicopter. I got through to the second part of the interview, like a couple days later. They liked me. It was great. But they only had 3 spots open, and I was one of 5. And this was in the time before I flew for PJs, before I had done a whole lot of single pilot stuff. And so, needless to say, three of the other guys got the jobs and I didn't. And so I got pretty discouraged at that point. And so I didn't apply. I got discouraged and a little bitter. Wow. Well, the SD card filled up. Look at where we are, you guys. I want to go back to the point I was making a minute ago, or several minutes ago, a couple hours ago, probably, about how it's just all about the adventure, man. You know, people are always jealous about the travels I get to do and stuff. It's always work related. I mean, and that's just the nature. My nature is to make the best out of every trip. Take a different route, you know, explore, find something new. This is gorgeous. This is nature. This is beauty. And this is what I want to experience and see as much of it as possible. And that's why when I kind of settled into Lifeflight, I was going to have to say goodbye to this quite a bit. So, all right, dudes, we filled up the memory card. And I either don't have any like really good ones, or I've got one. And if you don't put a really good memory card in these GoPros, they overheat and they shit the bed. So we're resorting back to the cell phone now. Hopefully this footage holds and is usable. We got the audio going here, so hopefully the audio will match with the rest of the video. But trying to wrap this up. So I was kind of bitter, I didn't get the job, and I had applied, and I'd been applying for years, and I was like, I'm never going to make it with these guys. And what they told me on that last interview, the one that I went in person, and then I went and flew, is they said, you know what, we can tell you'd be a great fit here, but unfortunately, we can't hire everybody we want to hire. We'd love to hire you, but you know what, we only have so many positions. And don't be discouraged. We'd love for you to keep coming back. And I was like, dude, I've heard this story. I've heard it. I ain't coming back no more. I was freaking upset, And so, but they were very encouraging. And he told me, he's like, you know what? He had to interview twice to get this job. He had to interview 3 times to get this job. Took him years to come here. And, we looked around the table and they tried to encourage me. And it's just such a phenomenal program and company. It's unlike anything else. I'll try to go into that in greater detail in another video if it's even appropriate to do so. But we're getting high up in these mountains now, dude. It's going to be 5,000 feet before you know it. But, so I didn't even apply for a couple years. I was like, man, I'm never going to do it. I'm never going to make it. I'm never going to be good enough. I'm not what they want. And I didn't apply for a couple years. Finally, a position came out. I applied for it. This is a long story, but somehow my application slipped through the cracks. So I got discouraged again. I was like, are you serious? Now they're not even calling me back anymore. Okay, great. So I kind of stewed on that for a couple years. And finally, I had a phone call with my boss now over the phone I called from Alaska. He knows people I know up there, and they're like, oh, you should give him a call. I've got his phone number here. Let's call him. So I call him up. I talk to him on the phone. And I'm like, dude, you're the chief pilot. Okay, cool. Next time I'm around, I'll come in and visit you. And so it was like a year later before I actually stopped in to visit him. And so when I stopped in to visit him, I was like, I brought him my resume, and I was like, the last go around, I didn't even get called. And he's like, are you kidding me? You're a total shoo-in. He's like, I will keep you on my database. You will be updated every position we get, and I will make sure that your application doesn't get overlooked, I was like, okay, sounds good. So, leading back up to where kind of this whole detour started is around the time that I got checked out to do construction in the Sky Crane, there was a job opening. I applied for it, and I was offered an interview. And so it had been about 3 or 4 years since the last one. And they had me do a first part of the interview over like a recorded responses. It's kind of before Skype was really taken off. Not Skype, but Zoom or whatever. And it was interesting. It was a weird format to do an interview, but I felt like I did good. And a couple days later, the boss, he calls and he's like, man, that's great. We want to have you in for an interview. It's going to be great. I was like, dude, I had to tell him on the phone right there. I was like, man, I'm only a year into the Sky Crane company. They just put all this time and effort into me to do the construction for them, and I'm one of 3 guys in the company that can do it. I have to withdraw my application, man. I can't leave this company. And he's like, oh, man, no way. I totally understand. I totally get that. And he said, I really appreciate the integrity that you have for your company, and that goes a long way. It means a lot. It means more than you know. And I was like, yeah, I know, but... So I rescinded my application, and that was a hard call to make, dude. This had been my dream job forever, right? But I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it to HTS, especially after they had paid me while I had my broken leg. So I feel indebted to HTS still, and I should. And that's why I'm going back to make good on, God dang it, this thing. To make good on, the good company that they are for me. And make good money on the side. And continue on the adventure, And so I went and did that year doing construction, and another opportunity came around. I applied for that one, and this time I went through the full thing because I felt like, you know what, I've given HTS I've met their requirements of contractually of my type rating certificate, and I felt like it wasn't the best thing to do for them, but I felt like it was fair, This was, after all, the job that I'd wanted forever and been applying for forever. So, interviewed for the job, offered the job. It was a really hard call to make the decision. The family was totally content with me not taking the Lifeflight job. Totally content with me staying, doing 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, flying sky cranes, doing firefighting. The family, my daughter, and everybody's like, "No, Dad, you're making great money. Why would you want to?" No. You got to look at all the bad sides. And man, I wish the camera was working because this is freaking phenomenal. Look at this. Shit, beautiful. We already summited and we're headed back down. Gorgeous, man. Oregon. Oh my God. If I ever had to leave Utah to live. Northern California, Oregon, Washington. Big mountains, snow, big wilderness, public lands, and the ocean. And trees and forests. They've got it all, man. No Red Rock Desert, but I can do without that. I'll go visit that. So, yep, there it was, dude. There it was. Put in my, and at the time, I was kind of renegotiating my wages and stuff with HTS for the construction work I was doing. Because, yeah, I did take a pretty substantial pay increase to go do that stuff. I still probably should have been making more for as risky of work as what I was doing. So we will see what happens as time rolls on here. But for now, they're offering me a pretty decent rate to come back out and work for them part-time. And I'm just super psyched that my boss here is really happy to have me back. Door's always open. The door's wide open for me to come back. Got a great reputation here. And, these jobs, there's only a handful of sky crane jobs in the country. Or the world, really. And so they're closely guarded, it's golden opportunities, golden tickets. So you just don't want to burn bridges and you don't want to close down opportunities, close doors. So we'll see where this carries off to, but it's kind of hard to imagine, juggling and having multiple irons in the fire, but hopefully it'll be worth it. And so there you have it, people. Long-winded story of a great journey of becoming a helicopter pilot and a career path. And like I said, I got about 25 more years ahead of me. So I've got several friends that have helicopters and have their own side gigs going. And I'll probably potentially be going out and doing different things, odds and ends here and there. And I can't say that I have aspirations of owning my own helicopter one day, but it's not off the table. I've definitely entertained that to some degree over the years. But I have other plans. If I'm going to start businesses, I've got some other plans that probably take precedence over that. So anyway, if anything, this video, if I break it up into 3-part series or whatever, tells you is that an average dude, an average guy can dream and can make it work. There's other better jobs to have out there. It's a grind. It's super hard. It comes with a lot of sacrifice, but whether or not I would do it again, I guess I just can't answer that. If I could look back on day one and look and see, I bet you that if at that point I would look and be like, no, it's not worth all that. It's not worth all that. I'd be better off doing something else. But now, as the journey has wore on, it's definitely got its perks. It's the best job ever. Every day is an adventure. You go somewhere else. You're operating a highly sophisticated piece of equipment and machinery with at a high rate of speed, very capable, bringing healthcare services to people in need, taking them emergencies and transporting freaking heroes. These flight nurses and paramedics are the shit they do. and the shit they see, and just being a part of the first responder community, which I've only done now for a year, plus a year way back when, is a calling that is immensely rewarding. And I don't try to pursue this whole sky crane business because that's not fulfilling enough. It certainly is. I just feel like I have unfinished business here. And, let's face it, man, the wife and the family are expensive. So it's like, how hard would you work and how many days of work would you spend to make like $200,000 a year? Everything comes with a compromise, so just got to take it as it comes and see how she goes. We're in prime Sasquatch country through here, if you believe in that silly stuff. Man, it's beautiful up here. But it's definitely the best job, and it's so diverse. You can do it anywhere around the world if you can make it so you can get the ratings and certifications and stuff to go fly in Europe, the Swiss Alps, fly in Australia, New Zealand. I mean, like, it's a career that can take you anywhere. And when you're starting up that helicopter and everything's systems are all go and you're pulling pitch and lifting that thing up to a hover, maneuvering around, setting up to do some work, there's no other better job, man. I mean, like, it's a miracle that these machines are even invented and engineered and produced. And there's some seriously badass ones out there for sure. Top king on the list might be the MH-53 Kilo. I think it's the Kilo. The Marines Pavelo or whatever. Unreal. That's the cargo version of the sky crane, essentially. A little bit bigger, more badass. They got 3 engines. So it's still the best job. When I'm doing my job, I don't have any regrets. When you can finally work your way into a position, there's like 15 of us that have this job in Utah. There's people all over the country that want that job. And for good reason, because it's an awesome job and it's an awesome thing to do with your life. So being a helicopter pilot is certainly worth it. It just comes at a cost. It certainly comes at a cost, but tied in with that cost is a lifetime and a career long full of adventure, man. I mean, like, I don't know if I could have it any other way. Still got a long ways to go, so there you have it, people. You tell me, what should I do? I'm going to upload this to my existing channel because why not? But if you think I should start a whole new channel that just features helicopter action, firefighting, EMS stuff, most of the companies have, specific policies on how much and what you can really share. As far as first-person view, POV type stuff, I'd have to try to get permission to post some stuff like that. But almost nobody has policies against, filming other aircraft and filming the aircraft from the ground while it's doing what it's doing. So there's still lots of opportunity for content and stuff like that. But if it's a channel you'd be interested in, or if you just came across this video because you're a new pilot or an old pilot or whatever, leave me some feedback, leave me some comments, see where we go from here. So thanks for listening to my 3-hour-long rambling session. Can't say when there will be another one of those. My throat is dry. I've exposed far too much of myself as it is, but outside of my comfort zone, but maybe it's some information that could be of use to somebody. And if nothing else, what I do here is keep it real. I keep it real, dude. I mean, like, you want to know how I feel about something? Ask me and I'll freaking tell you. I don't sugarcoat anything. Sometimes a little bit too brash, but if you're looking for opinions, thoughts and feelings, you can come here and be sure to get them. Not candy coated. So anyway, rambling on. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Take care. Bye.